The FAA working very hard to integrate unmanned aircraft into the national airspace system in every way we can. The biggest thing we've got going here, we had a press conference about it yesterday, and we're working with our industry partners on our Know Before You Fly campaign. If you haven't heard about it, you can come by our booth and talk about it. The exciting news today is that I just made an agreement with DJI, and that in their U.S., the equipment they ship in the U.S., they're going to be including these materials from the FAA in their boxes to help promote safe operations of unmanned aircraft by the tremendous numbers of people who are purchasing them now. So that's big news. I think that's one of our important activities going on, because the FAA is about education, getting people to comply voluntarily with our rules. Enforcement is not our emphasis, it's on compliance, and compliance is best achieved through education. So this Know Before You Fly campaign is extremely important for us. The next big thing that we're doing is we've created a way to approve unmanned aircraft in advance of any rulemaking through a process that was enabled in our reauthorization bill of 2012, where Congress gave us the authority to not require the aircraft to be certified. Before that, every aircraft had to be certificated by the FAA as airworthy, and we figured out a way to take advantage of that permission from Congress, and we're now up to 15 permissions granted. We just had a couple that we granted earlier this week to get us to 15. We're also in the process of streamlining and accelerating that effort, because right now we have over 200 applications have been filed for those permissions. So the commercial use inside the U.S. is going to be picking up tremendously. We've got one of our early adopters down here on the panel with us, so I'll let them talk to you about how that's going. And then finally, we're working on the permanent solution of a rule for operating commercial use of small unmanned aircraft. That rule is currently being worked with our partners inside the administration. We're doing everything we can to move it forward, and primarily the main emphasis is to get that rule right, because it is a tremendous effort that we're going through to get it done. We want it to be right, and we want it to be safe for everyone.
So just kind of speaking about that, with all these kind of rules that are currently being made, and this is going to be particularly kind of pointed at Chris, Tony, and Henri, as you are making drones. Chris, can you talk a little bit about how does this factor into when you're developing drones and how you run the business?
Absolutely. So I think we all want the same thing, which is safe and responsible use. And there's lots of ways to solve that. Part of it comes from the regulatory side. Part of it comes from the operators, and behaving, knowing what safe and responsible use means, complying. And the last part comes from the manufacturers like us, not only just packaging material in our boxes, but also using the intelligence of our vehicles to train people to be safe and responsible. I mean, one of the things that makes drones as opposed to radio control aircraft is that they're intelligent. They have brains on board. They're often connected to the ground with a smartphone, and those smartphones are connected to the internet. And so, one of the things that through the Small UAV Coalition, which is us, and DJI, and Parrot, and Amazon, and Google, as a trade group, is what we're doing is we're going to be standardizing on basically a code of conduct by which we implement a data layer that defines safe in any particular situation. So, for example, I'm just making this up, but imagine if you buy a drone out of the box on Christmas morning, you unwrap it, and it can fly within a 100-meter bubble, 100 meter up, 100 meters, about maybe 100 feet, basically your backyard. Now, once you connect it to an app, then it starts to know where is it in the world. Are you near an airport? It starts to understand some of the FAA guidelines and starts to implement them. Then maybe you go through a training process by which you would sort of go through a little learning thing and understand what safe and responsible means. And that might expand your bubble a little bit further. Then maybe we would start to include things like ultimately airspace deflection. Are there any other aircraft in the area? In which case that bubble would shrink. How about the vehicle characteristics? Battery life, performance. Then it would also shrink. And so I think that if we as an industry can help the FAA FAA by bringing data and intelligence to the job to help users get better at complying with the rules. It's too hard for the FAA to enforce. We can't, as the technology becomes more sophisticated, the users become less sophisticated because they're so easy to use. We can't always expect them to read the instructions. And so we want to use the intelligence to guide them to do the right thing.
So, Tony, you've already, your company, if you could, I guess, first off, talk a little bit about what your company does. And then just, you recently had an exemption given for your use. So can you talk a little bit about your experience in getting that exemption, why it was important to have it?
Sure. Aerial mob is, we have many facets, if you will, of our business model, of which one of is closed set film production, or movie production, TV shows, commercial production. And that is the area in which we were one of the first companies, very proud to be one of the first companies to be granted a 333 exemption by Jim Williams' department at the FAA. Other sides of our business is we have technology consulting, technology integration, because beyond the film production piece that we formed a major part of our business around, we have aspirations that we are going towards other industries and going to be pursuing other exemptions to do anything from agriculture applications to utility company applications. There's a bunch of different areas we're working on. So it's an exciting time. So that's one aspect. And then again, like we do technology consulting for various companies that want to talk to somebody who's gone down the road and work with the FAA on establishing the proper operational procedures and safety guidelines to operate, as Chris put. Number one aspect of this whole thing, even before we started the FAA exemption process, is safety. The safety is paramount when we operate on the set. We're actually operating right now in Colorado on a Aerospace commercial. And number one thing when we walk on set that day is making sure everything's completely safe. In a lot of ways, our own personal, when I say personal, our own business goals and objectives from a safety perspective are very much in line with the FAA. In some cases, we go a little bit beyond that. We're all about safety. So it's an exciting time for the commercial use of drones because I know there's a lot of people out there that wish Jim's office would move a little quicker. But if you really think about it, and what I've learned over the last couple of years in getting involved in this, is that I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for what they have to do, because imagine integrating all the different various uses of unmanned aerial systems into national airspace. It's a very daunting task. And I think the way they're approaching it, and it has taken a very measured approach. And where's the low-hanging fruit, if you will, in industries that pose very little risk? The closed set film production, the whole argument is that it's a closed set, it's a closed environment. So the two main issues of safety and privacy are mitigated greatly on a closed set film production. And then some of the other areas in which Jim Williams' office in the last several weeks have granted exemptions kind of fall into the same parameters. Does it mitigate the safety and the privacy issues? And I think it does. So that's Aerial Mob's perspective on that.
So that kind of brings me to a question that I have is, why are we worried about creating a comprehensive regulatory rule? Why don't we just do exemptions the whole way through? Why isn't that the solution? Jim or anyone?
I'll definitely take that one on. The exemption process is set up for the exceptions. And so it's fairly labor intensive thing. Every application has to go out for public comment. What it amounts to is each exemption is its own little miniature rule. And so it's considered a rulemaking process, and so all of the process that goes with rulemaking has to be followed. Once we have a rule out that sets up a structure for approval of aircraft and pilots for commercial use, it'll be much easier, more streamlined. It'll be done through our field offices instead of centralized in headquarters. So it's much more the way we normally do business. And the objective in my organization is to integrate the approval of unmanned aircraft into the FAA standard way of doing business. So it's just like another aircraft.
So I'll get back to kind of, given that there are exceptions to be had for very specific use cases, there is this general rule coming eventually. Henri, when you're making drones, Parrot rolled out several new models this year. I assume there are a lot of technological concerns you have to have, but also how do you deal with kind of the uncertainty around it, particularly?
So I think there is two different domains. One is the consumer drone. So the consumer drone is done for somebody that have no idea of what is an aerial vehicle, and also many times people fly them indoor where there is no FAA regulation to fly indoor. So the drone should be by itself not dangerous. And this is, I think, the work that the drone designer can do. If you compare to biology, you see that a small bird is nearly as capable as a large bird. I mean, in terms of speed, of distance they can fly. But for an engineer, it's more difficult to do a small bird. But we are very interested in doing them small, not dangerous, even if you touch it, if you keep play with it, etc. So there is the FAA regulation on one side, but also you have, we follow other regulations like toy regulations, where define a lot of questions of the energy, the total energy you can put on the, and we are very in favor of those regulations. Then for professional usage, I mean on the airspace, what I can say from my experience from an European company is the effort done in the US for the FAA is done everywhere. I mean, the government body, they are in favor of drones. And ourselves, the drone maker, we are in favor of the regulations. And I think it's complex because the airspace is something that is shared by a lot of users. But I think it's very positive, you know, for the industry and for the customers and for the application. And I think I've never seen the full industry and in every country teaming so well together to find solutions.
And so you spoke that there's there's toy regulations, there's remote control aircraft regulations. Of course, there's the FAA regulations coming. There's also state and other regulations as well. So this seems like a good question for Thomas. Can you talk a little bit about how the intersection of federal and state regulation and how you approach those issues?
Well, sure, I'm happy to. So, first of all, we acknowledge within Nevada that the FAA has primacy over the airspace. Okay, that is definitely a federal issue. So that's why, as a federally designated UAV test site, we work hand in hand with the FAA. So in that regard, we defer to the FAA's judgment in terms of allowance and ability to fly in the airspace. The other issue you touched on is privacy. And again, absent a federal policy, if you will, that comes out and really talks about it, issues of privacy I have witnessed are attempted and proffered forth on the state level. Okay? There are a handful of states that have enforced some type of privacy regulation or some type of prohibition on the use of UAVs. Sometimes that prohibition is against law enforcement. Other states have prohibited the general public from the use and application of drones. That being said, I'll speak from the Nevada perspective. We're very libertarian. We take a much more laissez-faire approach in the fact that we feel that the body of knowledge that exists in court-made law on a Supreme Court level at this point is sufficient. However, we're always interested in making sure that the constitutional rights of our citizens are protected. And so we're always out there looking at what else we may have to do to protect those rights. And I will tell you, it's a fast-moving train. All right, it moves faster, I think, than us as state representatives can talk about. And I'm sure from industry's perspective, you know, it's an issue they have to be aware of, but I'm sure it doesn't. I don't know if it keeps you awake at night or not.
Does it keep any of you awake at night? Any uncertainty? The way these regulations are fast moving? Is that something?
It's very, I mean, the technology industry has always been moving a little faster than regulations. Look at Uber, Airbnb, you know, intel, et cetera. I mean, I think it's just basically we're all moving into the gray zone. Almost all great innovation happens in the gray zone. Rather than wait for the gray zone to become white or black, you just experiment, and then the regulators have some data to work with, and they respond and you comply. And that sort of probe and respond is quite traditional. It doesn't work.
So speaking of gathering data, Jim, what is the FAA doing to try to kind of get a handle on what needs to go into the rule whenever it's finally kind of complete set?
Well, a few years ago, we formed an industry committee which we call the Aviation Rulemaking Committee, to advise us on what the industry thought should go into the rule, which we've taken that into consideration. I've also spent a lot of time working with my fellow regulators from around the world to understand their regulatory structure and the successes or problems that they've had with that regulatory structure in that country. So we've attempted to roll all of that information into the product that everyone will be seeing here soon. What then will occur is a period of public comment. And all of you as citizens of the United States are quite welcome to go online and submit your comments about how you think that rule is done. A word of caution, though, is that we have to disposition every one of those comments, and the time it takes us to disposition the comments is part of the time that it takes to get to the final rule, which is produced once we've taken into consideration all of those comments from the public, dispositioned them, and then created a rule that addresses the needs of the government and the position of the people in the United States that commented on that rule. So that's where we're headed, and the rulemaking process is set up the way it is to make sure that the public does have a broad opportunity to comment on the rules before they become final.
Jim, can I take advantage of this unique opportunity to lobby you from the stage? I get a little ahead of you. Maybe you can disposition my comment instantaneously. We have an amazingly great example, precedent in the technology industry for something like this. And this is in the wireless space with Wi-Fi, open spectrum. The FCC, in its wisdom, created a sandbox called Open Spectrum, 2.4 gigahertz range, and unleashed an extraordinary amount of creativity around and innovation and economic growth around Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and everything else. I think that, I can't speak for everybody in our industry, but I think that the notion of a sandbox, the notion of an area that's inherently safe, to Henri's point about maybe low kinetic energy, just something that's small and light and low, where the regulations would be very light. Something like an open spectrum kind of model for small UAVs, I think would be the best way to meet the innovation needs of the industry while also complying with the overall safety needs of your administration. Can you comment at all about the FCC precedent with open spectrum and the notion of a sandbox?
Well, from a sandbox standpoint, I think, from how to develop the industry, that's exactly why we created 6 test sites to learn from them, and well in advance of the rule. I think it's just unfortunate I can't comment on the rule because then I can really get into addressing your comment. But I guess the best I can say is that we've noted that, and you're not the first person that's brought up that idea, and it'll be factored in once we get to a final rule.
But there is also a regulation for remote aircraft hobbyists. So this regulation, if we fulfill this regulation as a drone maker, it means that there is already a kind of sandbox that is usable for the drone designers.
Yeah, I mean, personally speaking, I almost don't care what the boundaries of the sandbox are. 100 feet, 83 feet, something. Just tell me what it is. I mean, the beauty is that the reason the FCC created the sandbox for Wi-Fi is that technology had the ability to deconflict the airspace itself. And with small UAVs, we have the ability to deconflict the airspace. And when they go wrong, when Wi-Fi goes wrong, it doesn't wipe out grandma's UHF. And when small UAVs like Henri's Bebop go wrong, nobody gets hurt. It very much falls into that sort of no harm, no foul analogy.
And speaking, I'd just like to get a little bit more about the test sites. If we could, just how those were chosen, what their purpose is, and if that purpose is kind of set in stone, if it's something that's going to evolve over time.
Well, sure, and so I can tell you from our perspective, from Nevada's perspective, the process we were involved with, I can't comment on why specifically we were chosen. I believe it's because of the strengths that we brought in terms of our ability to test, our ability to offer up, I think, a huge amount of open area and I'm going to use the term open skies, albeit in deference to the FAA regulations and such. But in terms of what we look at from a test site, so you talked about the Section 333 exemptions. Understand that FAA Reauthorization Act of 2012 also directed the FAA to select 6 test sites to which to advance the industry. What my background is on the military and applications, from what you see in MQ1s, MQ9s, the events that happen in terms of DoD apps, which are large platforms. In the last 2.5 to 3 years, what we've seen is the growth of the small UAS industry. Henri, your products, your products in terms of the smalls. That's real interesting to us because it's not a big, couple 100-pound platform. It's small, it's personal, it's the commercialization. But I also understand, looking forward, that as the utility of these platforms becomes known and becomes accepted, I think there will also be a propensity to grow that size and to grow the duration and to grow the ability of these things to fly at higher altitudes. As such, then, what a test site does is we offer, in my opinion, that bridge. The bridge from your personal use to where the small UAS rule will suffice. But as you grow and as you move and you start becoming bigger and much more prevalent, you're going to need places where you can push the envelope and the boundary of the larger systems, and that's what the test sites do. Okay, we provide a high degree of testing efficacy, ability to test, and frankly in Nevada, our history, we've got over 45-year pedigree in the development of unmanned systems, and we're very good at, before these systems are introduced and utilized, we break them. Okay? And we break them because we want to push their envelopes. We want to make sure that they provide the utility and the pedigree that's necessary for the user. And that's, in my opinion, that's what the test sites are designed to do.
Okay. And I know that, at least I believe part of the test site is also looking at certification and standards requirements. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I'm curious to know, is it eventually everyone's going to have a drone license to fly their drone? Is that what? Yeah, pilot's license. The equivalent. I mean, is that? It seems slightly absurd to suggest that to me, across the board. But how are you looking at that question? What is it going to look like?
Well, I'll take that on. The FAA, for those of you who don't know, every 3, 4, 5 years, the FAA has to get reauthorized by Congress. And by authorized, that means that they acknowledge we continue to need to exist and do our job. And in those reauthorization bills, they'll give us new instructions about how they want us to do our business. Now, our last bill came out on February 14th of 2012. Happy Valentine's Day, FAA. In that bill, there were a whole bunch of provisions. It was 6 pages of the bill was dedicated to unmanned aircraft. There were 17 specific directions to the FAA to accomplish. Test sites being one of them. But they, excuse me, I'm losing my voice. So the intention around the test sites was to create an environment where manufacturers could go test their aircraft and learn about their aircraft. But from the pilot standpoint, there are existing provisions in our law that says every aircraft operator must have a certificate, which means they have to be a licensed pilot. That's in the law. We can't exempt from that, but what we can do is define what it means to be an unmanned aircraft operator in the rules. And that's part of the process that we're going to have to go through is to define what that is. Now, for the existing operators that we're approving to fly, they're all required to have a certificated pilot, and which we currently, all of our 333 exemptions are being required to have a private pilot's license, which a lot of people have said, well, that's ridiculous for an unmanned aircraft, but it isn't. It is a legal requirement in the law. You have to be a certificated pilot, and that's the certificate we have available to offer right now. So until we do a regulation to create a new certificate type, that's where we're at. So unless Congress changes the law to not require a certificated pilot for every aircraft, and oh, by the way, in that 2012 bill, they defined all unmanned aircraft as aircraft under the law. So that means that even the Bebop, if it's being used for commercial purposes outdoors, it's subject to FAA regulation under the rules of aircraft. Now, we all understand that wasn't exactly what they meant by that, and they understand that too, so we'll see what happens in the next reauthorization.
And I can address that to a certain extent, because Aerial Mob, as a 333 exemption holder, when this first came up, I don't know, 8-9 months ago, of course, we were taking back like private pilot's license. It really doesn't correlate with the operation of unmanned aero systems. But beyond what Jim had said in terms of actual law, if you really think about it, the person flying this aircraft, if he's flying 300 or 400 feet, he really does need to have knowledge of airspace. And beyond that, on our crews, a third person on our crew, a visual observer, has to have ground school certification, the same thing. It's all going back to the safety argument, is that the person flying that aircraft should know airspace, and the best way that the U.S. has to know airspace is, at the very minimum, having ground school certification. So we were just like the masses out there thinking, wow, private pilot lessons, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But now that we've gone through the whole process and we've completed the process and got the exemption, we completely understand it now, and again, have a lot of sympathy for how they're going to handle it once the rules come out also, because I know there's still a lot of people that hope that goes away.
So what does that do for you, Chris, and Henri? Like, if you have to have, I mean, does that do anything to the way you approach your business? Like, if people all of a sudden, they can't just go into a store and buy and start flying around, right? You have a certification requirement. Like, does that affect?
I'm an optimist. I heard Jim's remarks as saying, watch the space, the congressional evaluation may change that. I believe that wise minds will come to a reasonable conclusion. I'm going to stand by.
Okay. Are you going to be helping with their education to help those wise minds?
Absolutely. Small UAV Coalition is specifically designed to inform and educate all the parties about what's unique about small UAVs. And, Henri and DJI and 3DR, we're making vehicles that start, what is it be about right now? A kilogram maybe?
500, 400 pounds.
Yeah, half of a kilogram, it's going to go down. I mean, we're talking about things that are ultimately going to be the size of your hand. And I think, small is different. We want to inform regulators about the trends of technology towards, smaller kinetic, energy, and why that does dictate, much as Wi-Fi did, a different regulatory approach.
And also, I think there are a lot of future usages that are exactly in between professional and consumer. For example, agriculture. Most of the people that will use a drone for agriculture is to fly over their own field or their own property. So it's very important to have a regulation that permit a person to use a drone, a small drone, for something which is you can consider commercial, but on a certain other way you can consider that as private. And because I think this is where the benefits of the drone. The benefits of the drone will be like the PC, like the personal computer. You need to do things around yourself or around your business or around your property. And this is why we are looking and hoping that the regulation will permit to fly those drones in the gray space between professional and consumer, where is the real business and functionality that will be developed by the drone in the future.
And I'd also like to follow up in terms of you mentioning the fact that Congress in the reauthorization committee. I'm going to speculate that I don't believe in 2012 Congress, when this particular bill was passed, actually envisioned the embracement of small UAS by all of you and by the industry. I think they really looked at more of the existing stockpile of current systems, which again are large, and thought, how do those get integrated for commercial and civilian use? And frankly, this whole idea of this burgeoning growth of smalls, and again, all of you, that look at, a small system and how this can be used for humanitarian purposes, delivery and everything else. I don't think Congress at that point ever saw the particular growth in the less than 55-pound category. And they do have a chance, I think, with your efforts and the efforts of the public and users to be able to educate Congress and understand that it's a unique group that I think is bound to really grow exponentially and really overtake kind of the large UAS platforms that exist out there.
So, I mean, with kind of having already seen one rulemaking coming from Congress that maybe was not, couldn't see the future, and we know that they won't be able to, who knows what drones are going to look like in 5 years, 10 years. How do you make sure that we get a rule eventually that's going to accommodate and be more flexible so that we don't see these kinds of issues coming up? Or is it okay to just kind of iterate as we go along? How do you approach the rulemaking process to get where we're trying to go?
So again, so my comment, and Jim and his staff has heard me say this, in the fact that from a technological perspective, from your industry, from the industry, the digital world, you're most used to working in an unregulated environment, mostly unregulated, right? I mean, you think of a great idea, you think of a disruptive technology, and you go out and you do it. And you work at light speed, right? You work at entrepreneurial light speed to get things done. This is a different construct because now you're talking about working in the national airspace, right? The national airspace is highly regulated. It's not an unregulated environment, it's extremely regulated environment. And the FAA has the authority and has basically been designated by Congress to do so. So your entrepreneurial mindset and construct is very important, but you're in a new realm. You're in a universe that's highly regulated. So I think the answer there lies in the middle. I mean, the ability to proffer to Congress and get them to understand that they need to move faster and put in much more flexible regulations. But also, I think there has to be an acceptance of the industry set that this is a regulated environment. You are dealing with a space now, Internet of Things. It's no longer digital space. It's a physical manifestation of airspace that you want to work in, and that's your sandbox. And the FAA regulates that sandbox.
There is already a lot of regulation on the electronics, but there is a lot of regulations that we can follow. For example, commercial aircraft should be robust to a bird. So a bird has a certain weight, it's defined properly. So if we are the same amount of energy than the bird, this is a regulation we can use, and we are not dangerous for